Welcome back, my lords and ladies, to the Cast Beyond the Wall. We are your guides to all things Westerosi, and we're here to bring you a review, analysis, and fan v fan debate of each episode of HBO's hit show, Game of Thrones. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and guys, Peter Baelish, from the dead, contributing to the death of the Night King with his dagger. You see, he is the greatest contributor to the death of the Night King.
Okay, look, Caleb. I've been thinking about this. He said it was his dagger and it wasn't his dagger. So do we really know if it was his dagger? I mean, come on.
Listen here. All I know is he gave it to Bran, who gave it to Arya, and it was Valyrian steel. I'm saying it's Baelish's dagger.
It sounds like it was the town dagger, honestly.
Hey, listen, I'm just so happy that my favorite character from the grave is still contributing to the betterment of the show. So today we'll be giving you our initial review for Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night, before jumping into not quite a scene-by-scene recap like we normally do. This is actually going to be a lot more analysis-driven, and we're going to go hit like some major pieces of the battle, but I don't think we're going to do quite a scene-by-scene breakdown because for you listeners out there, I think it's going to be a lot more interesting if we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode. But I will not be doing this recap and review alone. I have to introduce my hosts from the Dornish lands of Arizona. Sir, introduce yourself.
My name is Aslukari, and only one thing left to say after this episode, and that's what is dead may never die.
Moment of silence.
Thank you.
I never thought I would have said that 3 years ago or 4 years ago, but here we are at the end of the road on Game of Thrones, mourning Theon Greyjoy. We're going to talk about that later. But first, I need to introduce my other co-host from the Starkish lands of Kentucky. Sir, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Danial Stoll, and guys, this episode was such an emotional roller coaster. You know, I'm just really, really tired, and I really feel like I need something to, give me some energy, maybe build up some strength in me, maybe something like some Giant's milk or something. Just really needs after this. I endured everything that happened. Just really need this recovery period, and I think Giant's milk will help with that.
I think Tormund's got your back, man. He's got lots of that Giant's milk, from what I hear.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to him about that. So.
Well, sir, I'm so glad to have you on this episode. And as always, we are joined by our rotating guest host of the week. And this season, it's really, this is the send-off season, so we're really just going to be bringing back the greatest guest co-hosts of previous years. Last week, we had Ben Friend, who's been on this show every year, and we're following up with someone else who's been on this show every year. It's my honor to reintroduce Dalton Stewart from Good Trash Media. Welcome back to the Cast Beyond the Wall.
Hey, guys. I watched Avengers Endgame and this episode of television less than 12 hours apart.
Oh, God.
It was a doozy of a Sunday. I'm still feeling it. I'm pop culture hungover today.
Pop culture hungover is a great way to
I could also use some Giant's milk, I think.
Giant's milk all around. That's the only way to get through the trials and tribulations of pop culture hangovers.
It's got all that protein for recovery. It's good.
What a time we live in when we can use the term pop culture hangover.
I don't like it.
I don't know if I do either.
I've decided I don't like it. If you had told me in season 2 of this show and whatever MCU movie was out season 2 of this show that I would hate both of these franchises by this point, I wouldn't have believed you. But I'm lying. I love both of these dumb franchises. I'm tired. I'm so tired, but I'm very excited to talk about this episode with the three of you. Thank you so much for having me back. It has been a joy every season to come on and be part of the show.
Excellent. Well, we love having you on every year. You bring a lot of great analysis, and you keep it fun. And as I recall, last season you were on another very action-heavy episode when we went to the titular Beyond the Wall. And we fought dragons. We fight Zom dragons. That was the last time we saw the Zom dragon. And we fought the whites. And here
was
you are.
I
again.
on Hardhome as well? I've deliberately gamed the system to try and be on the action heavy episodes.
Well, sir, you have succeeded so far. We're thrilled to have you back. Before we jump into our review and recap of this week's episode, The Long Night, I do want to remind you that you can track all of our posts on social media, our social media channels, including Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT, and on Facebook at facebook.com/cast beyond the wall. And of course, all of our posts this year are posting on goodtrashmedia.com. We can also find that on Twitter at good_trash. So we have all sorts of good things to talk about. One last announcement I want to make is that we are halfway through the season, and I would love to hear more from listeners of the show over the years. I would love to hear what you think about this season. I'd love to hear you what you maybe one of your favorite episodes or moments from Game of Thrones as a whole is, or a favorite moment of the podcast. That could be, Austin predicting that that Cersei was the one who killed Joffrey, for example. That's a great memory of the podcast.
That is yet to be revealed, but mark my words.
So maybe that's something you enjoyed listening to on the show. So you can send all of those memories. I recommend you record these on, if you have an iPhone, voice memo. It's very easy to pop it open, hit record your memory, and send it off via an email to castbeyondthewall@live.com. If you aren't too fond of the audio, you don't really want your voice heard on a podcast, we are also taking listener emails at that same email, castbeyondthewall@live.com. And actually, I do have a note that I would like to read. So last week's episode was titled A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Now, a lot of us might not know these titles because HBO has been very intentional about hiding them this year. And the only way you don't find out until the next morning when all the recaps go up. It's because HBO doesn't even reveal the title on the streaming service until like around 11 p.m. to midnight. I can't figure out exactly what the magic time is yet. We have an email from a very long time listener. I mean, like way back listener, Chris Tobin, sent in a message. I had no idea the episode was titled A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms until I started listening to your podcast. And I thought I'd pass along that is the same title of the compendium of Sir Duncan and Aegon's books. So that, for those of you who don't know, that is George R. R. Martin, despite not finishing The Winds of Winter, has actually written a number of side stories set in the Westerosi Ice and Fire world at different points of time. And one of them are the Tales of Dunk and Egg and the Hedge Knight. So for those of you who were not familiar with Sir Duncan and Aegon's books, The Hedge Knight and The Tales of Dunk and Egg, they're a really fun read if you really enjoy the Westerosi world. And Tobin also points out that, of course, Brienne is going to get knighted in the episode. She's a direct descendant of Sir Duncan the Tall.
Whoa, really?
Right?
That's fun. I knew about Dunk and Egg, but that's cool. That's fun. I didn't know that.
I know. See, Tobin is a very, very well-read Ice and Fire reader. So, Tobin, thanks so much for chiming in and adding a little bit of a fun fact for us to read it here on the air. And for all of our listeners out there, if you would like to be heard or you have a question you want us to discuss, I hope you'll go ahead and consider writing in and sending that to the email castbeyondthewall@live.com. Chris Tobin, thanks for sticking with the show, man. But I think that'll about do it for now. We've got a lot to talk about in this episode, so let's go ahead and move right into our review and recap of Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night.
The most heroic thing we can do now is look the truth in the face.
The Night King is coming.
The dead are already here.
Stand your ground!
We're not going to be as recap oriented in this episode. So I think if we spend a little bit more time in this kind of review piece, there's a lot of questions I want to throw at you guys that will probably tie into some of the points we'll talk about as we go through the episode. But first and foremost, did we like the episode? Did we like it? Did we not like it? Why? Dalton Stewart, guest from Good Trash Media. Kick us off.
I have complicated feelings about this episode. I think it would be really dumb for me to go to bat for some of the cinematography choices on this episode. The internet is just really mad about this episode today. And it's I got to be honest, I think watching Game of Thrones become a pop cultural phenomenon has kind of led to some fatigue for me. And I think part of that is the endlessness with which we are debating which episodes are good. It becomes a bit exhausting and a bit tedious. And it would be silly for me to say that there are not some cinematography issues for this episode. And I think it really introduces an interesting conversation. If you are making a television show, does shooting your television show in a way that would almost only be viewable in a theatrical experience, is that a bad choice? And I think it's an interesting conversation to have. But because so much of this episode is centered on battle and combat, particularly in the dark, particularly in the middle of a snowstorm that's also covered in dragon's ash, it is kind of a tedious slog to look at times. That said, I think HBO kind of hoisted themselves by their own petards by spending so much time beating the drum of, this is the biggest battle ever, this is our Helm's Deep. It's not really an action episode, it's a horror episode. It's one of the few moments that this show has really got to lean into the kind of eldritch horror that makes the White Walkers so interesting. We get that in the first episode. We get a little taste of that at the end of the first episode of this season. Or was that was the first episode? So we've gotten tastes of that throughout the series, but I think this is an episode that, more than being an action episode, it really is a horror episode. And for me, it makes those moments where the screen is murky and disorienting. It honestly works for me because I like the sensation of being disoriented alongside the characters. And again, your mileage is going to vary as a viewer on whether or not you find that tolerable. But I think the episode itself finds enough room to breathe in these quiet moments of terror. Arya in the library, people hunkered down in the crypt, the tension in the Godswood, all of this stuff kind of like comes together and adds up to a really thrilling 90 minutes of television. That said, some of the battle stuff is frustrating. So yeah, I have complicated feelings about the episode. Overall, for me, it works really well. Just by virtue of these moments of triumph won through sacrifice, which I think has always kind of been a big part of what the experience of Game of Thrones is about. So yeah, I'm mostly positive on the episode, but I'm sure we'll talk more about the filmmaking techniques in place throughout this episode as we get further into our conversation. Yeah,
well, Harley, well said. We're going to go ahead and pass it to Daniel Stoll. What did you think of The Long Night?
I'm also pretty positive on this episode. I think that, as Dalton pointed out, there are some issues with it, and but when it's going for those big moments, I really feel like it just knocks it out of the park. And some of those openings, it really, Dalton referenced the horror aspect, and I was truly afraid in those first 30 minutes, especially of this. Just like, the tension building that they did in the first 10 minutes, especially, was just incredible. The Dothraki going out and then seeing that shot of all the lights going out. I mean, it was just so well done. So yeah, there was a lot of problems that happened, but there are also some beautiful shots in this episode, I think, as well. Another one that stands out to me is while there was some technical aspects that maybe I was frustrated with, when we see Dany and Jon just up above the clouds in the moonlight, just that one solo shot is just really, really gorgeous. And for me, this was an extremely emotional episode. We have moments with Arya, with Theon, with the Hound even. There are just all these moments that really, really have a lot of power behind, what these characters are experiencing. And I feel like I experienced the fear of death that they are also clearly experiencing throughout this episode. And I feel like they really did a really good job of, bringing that onto the screen and articulating that. So, this was an emotional roller coaster for me. And I feel like that's what this episode really, its strength is for me. And, where we end up, I did not expect for it to go down this way, but I'm really glad it did. And I feel like it's raised a lot of interesting questions, and I'm really excited to see where we go from here. So.
All right. So Daniel is also positive on the episode. We'll go ahead and pass it to Austin Lucari. What did you think of this week's episode?
It was a spectacle unlike we'd ever seen, I think, on television. I didn't have the visual issues that I know a lot of people reported. And honestly, all my friends, the internet, everyone has complained a lot about the episode being too dark, too cluttered, hard to see. I agree with Dalton on this. I think the darkness contributed to the horror aspect of it and contributed to the anxiety that the viewer felt. I do think the cinematography as a whole was actually really good. The scenes like Daniel mentioned were beautiful. Just still frames from those scenes could be hung on your wall. They turned out really, really nicely. I thought they did a good job in a lot of ways. That being said, I have a lot of issues with this episode. Number one being that despite you constantly feeling that kind of sense of anxiety and fear that your favorite characters are going to die, ended up being very little consequence as part of this episode. The plot armor was very, very thick. You have entire armies getting wiped out, but your 9 to 10 main characters, despite being draped with zombies, never really were even harmed. You had a few deaths, but overall, the consequences were really low when you're looking at the force that they were dealing with. And then the ending, I take a lot of issue with, but some of that's going to maybe have bigger effect in the weeks to come. I feel like the show was kind of built on being this built around the idea that the affairs of lords and ladies were unimportant in the face of this coming force of death. And that everyone was squabbling over these very trivial matters when there was this bigger thing at hand that needed to be taken care of. That big issue that we met in episode 1, season 1, was taken care of in essentially one battle. I felt like the ending to that storyline was too quick, too brief, and didn't carry enough consequence, at least from what it seems right now. Maybe in the coming weeks that changes. Maybe it carries bigger consequence than it seems to me at this moment. But I definitely have a lot of issues with where things ended up, both for the characters and the plot as a whole.
Okay, yeah, no, I feel that. And I know one thing we've talked about at length on this show over the years is that idea. The thing we really like about the show is that the politicking is always lots of fun, but this is kind of the big ominous thing that's coming. Death is coming for you. So it always felt like this was going to be sort of the end game with the Night King and the White Walkers coming south of the wall, Austin. And I definitely I hear you, and I understand why you feel that way. And for me, I think the jury's still out somewhat. I need to see the rest of the season because, to your point, if this is the only real blow that the White Walkers do total is just to kill off, a few of our characters, and of course they've ravaged the northern lands, but we don't. I mean, to your point, we're not really going to deal with that likely in the next couple of episodes. But at the same time, there's 3 episodes left, and I don't know if I'm going to have the best perspective on how impactful this White Walker threat really was until it's all said and done. Like what we thought it was going to be the end game. Maybe it's not, but that doesn't mean it's not important. This is where we get into the really interesting conversation, and this whole other podcast probably. But whenever we're watching something week to week versus watching a movie, week to week, we don't get the whole story all at once. So this week you're like, oh man, it's like last year we spent like 30 minutes arguing about Ed Sheeran at one point because I was convinced he was going to be impactful in future episodes somehow, and that scene actually mattered. And then the next episode where I was immediately like, oh, because I had more information, I was like, actually no, wait, that didn't matter at all. Why did I fight that battle on this podcast? But see, I mean,
it's documented forever. Everyone will always know that you fought for Ed Sheeran.
Season 7, episode 1 podcast. Yeah. So, but I use that as an example to say that sometimes we don't have the complete picture when we're watching week to week, and it's difficult for me to evaluate how I feel about how the White Walkers went out until we've seen the whole picture. So if I'm really being critical at this moment, yes, I agree. It feels like more people probably should have died since this is like the threat that's been building up to for years and years and years. But I will say, I mean, there were losses. I mean, there were big losses, at least I think. I mean, your mileage is going to vary, but we lost Theon, we lost Jorah. Those are 2 really heavy hitters in my book. Melisandre went out. We lost Ed Tollett, who's probably the most inconsequential. But, it wasn't like...
Don't you dare besmirch the good name of Dolorous Ed, you fiend. 999th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. The last of the OGs. How dare you?
It's really... It's really sad we didn't get to the 1,000th commander.
Oh, we were so close.
We got 999. We're never going to get I guess we'll eventually
we
get
don't
it.
even need one anymore.
Right. Like, we're never going to have a 1,000th commander. Like, it's so sad.
There's nothing to watch anymore.
The watches ended.
Everybody's watches
I'm not going to
ended.
lie. The second he saved Sam, there was about 30 seconds there where I was like, oh, he's dead. He saved Sam and made a witty comment, and I was like, yep, dead. It's going to hit him and there it goes. Yeah. But I mean, there were losses. Jorah's a pretty big one for me, and Theon, though we predicted it's a pretty big one. The other thing I want to lay out there is that something I've been thinking a lot about is, and I think the week to week contributes to the overall problem, but a lot of times on a show like Game of Thrones, we have been hyping this episode all season long, and some of that's the marketing. This has been the episode that they have been hyping for the whole season, like
for like a year.
Yeah, really. So we've been waiting for this. So whenever it doesn't meet your expectations, or whenever it doesn't meet your specific expectations, that's the question we have to say is, the question I have to ask myself is, like, for example, Austin, and this is something I know we're going to get into, but we can talk about it right now. We were all in on the whole, the Night King is actually not going to show up. He is going to go south and bait and switch and pull a Robb Stark at Whispering Wood. Right.
So much so that I've now banned myself from making predictions on the show anymore because I was wrong about everything.
I was really interested. I listened to last week's episode, and when you guys were actually the first people I had heard discuss this theory, and I had kind of gone whole hat on, we're going to resolve the conflict of the White Walkers in episode 3, and I was very surprised by that. And again, I really. Your guys' predictions really made me rethink that, and to see the episode end up resolving kind of how I expected it to was surprising. But I'm with you, Austin, in that I have always assumed that this series was about the politicking falling away to become kind of part of a more conventional fantasy narrative. And to see the show zig where I thought it was going to zag and say, no, we actually still are a show mostly about politicking. We're going to go ahead and resolve the big fantasy threat, and then still have a good chunk of story left to go. While it was not what I expected, I'm kind of excited to see it potentially return to that season 1 Game of Thrones, where now the real game is, how do we try to stop feudalism, which I'm surprised by.
And there's definitely an aspect of my reaction to it of what I wanted the show to be, it didn't end up being. That definitely exists. I can't deny that. But to build up this threat from the very first scene of the show, and it culminating in basically what ended up being a plot device to get Jon and Dany together, and that's basically it, is super disappointing to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
And this is where, and I think that's a great point, and I hear you, and this is where I'm saying I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with you yet, because we don't know. I don't know what the actual outcome of this battle is going to be. And here's the other thing too, and here's the elephant in the room. I know we're going to talk about this. I still am extremely not trusting Bran right now. So if say, for example, this entire battle leads to a really important event that sets off something in the last couple of episodes, it might be worth it. It might not. And that's, I hear what you're saying though. And I don't disagree. If this is all it amounts to, I probably will be a little disappointed. But at the same time, what's interesting to Dalton's point was we were all in on trying to outthink the show. We were like, oh, this is a cool thing. We think we know how it's going to go. The obvious answer to Dalton's point, that it seemed kind of the easy answer was, yeah, they're going to come in, they're going to beat the White Walkers in this episode. We were so convinced that they weren't going to, that when they did, I was actually kind of surprised. It was weird. It was like we had talked about all these other outcomes that could happen, but none of them, in my mind, I never truthfully was on the train of, yeah, they're going to resolve this in episode 3. It's not going to be that simple. And then it did, and it kind of caught me off guard, and I'm pretty happy about it at the same time.
You know what it makes me think of? What it makes me think of is, of all shows, weirdly, The Good Place. A show that kind of builds its success on the speed with which it burns through story. And every time you think you know where the story is going, nope, we're done. We've resolved that already. Now there's a new complication. So weirdly, that's the thing that I've been thinking a lot about today.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. Because that show is super fast. You think, oh, this is going to be a season-long thing. No, it's a couple of episodes, and we're on to the next thing. But what happens is, instead of looking at this grandiose, everything's leading to this one moment, what you have is more like a chain reaction type of story. Well, this thing happened that causes this other thing to happen, and it couldn't have happened had this not. You know what I mean? Like it's just different. Daniel?
And I don't want to belabor the point, but part of the issue with a week-to-week show is that when the episode ends, like for example, today, any moment that I was not like talking to someone else or doing something for work that I had to have my full attention, I was thinking about this episode. And when you can sit with your thoughts for a week and just think and think and think, and then you predict and predict, it can really, especially with a place like the internet where you can get online and talk to other people about theories and stuff, it can really impact what your expectations are and kind of put them in a bad place. And so that's kind of another, while the internet is great and you have this way where a place where you have a community where you can talk to other people about things that you both enjoy, and you can do some of that thing, it can also, do some harm in some places. I think for me, for anyone that watched Westworld, that was a show that really, really started to have an issue with that part of it. And the show almost became about how they could outthink the fans or whatever. So it can be a bad thing as well, but that's also part of the territory that comes with week-to-week shows.
Well, and Daniel, I think Westworld's a great example. My experience with this episode, I know we're only a day out, so it's kind of like hard to say this is the definitive experience, but my experience with this episode was I watched it. It was an incredibly emotional roller coaster. I was watching with a few friends, and we were literally like, okay, first third, we're all quiet. We're like waiting for the pin to drop. We see, the Dothraki run in, and their flames go, and we're like, holy shit, this is going to be awful. We see them hit a tidal wave. So it was just an emotional roller coaster. We were there for it. Yes, if I'm going to be critical, I think it was in places maybe just a tad too disorienting, mostly related to like the dragon flight. But again, that was an artistic decision, and I respect that artistic decision. It just didn't work for me all the time, but I certainly don't think it's a deal breaker for me on the episode. I love that it looked like a horror movie. I love that we have things that happen, like things that happen in the crypts or the library sequences that are just there to amp up the tension. Even if no one died in those scenes, they really added to the fear and anxiety I had in that moment, all leading up to the big climax where, the Night King is confronting Bran and Theon. I just didn't expect that to happen the way it did. I'm coming off of this. I think, wow, that was an episode. It was not what I expected, but I had a fun time, and I'm riding this high. And then I woke up the next morning to discover that half the internet hated this thing. It reminds me so much of The Last Jedi, my experience with The Last Jedi. I can't. It's too real. Like, whoa, there's a lot of people on the internet who hated this thing that I thought was amazing, like immediately afterwards.
There's no winning on the internet. But I think you brought up yesterday that it's like, I felt like it was a really kind of conventional episode in the terms of how things ended. Like all the stars survived, it kind of wrapped up real neatly. You said that it's actually kind of weirdly subversive for Game of Thrones to have a conventional episode, and you're not wrong there. I was expecting a lot of plot twists, and I didn't feel like I got that, and that exceeded my expectations in that way, I guess. So I hope that there is greater consequence down the road.
We've hit on a lot of the prelim questions. It seems like, generally speaking, we all really enjoyed it. I will say, I do think time will generally be very kind to this episode. I think time's going to be very kind to last week's episode too, for totally different reasons. I just think this is a very incredible thing to pull off on TV. I think it's a huge achievement. The thing was filmed for 55 nights, shot over 11 weeks. That is insane. And sub-zero temperatures too. I don't know if you guys have been catching up with these like little mini making of docs that HBO has been putting out. They put one out for The Long Night, and it was 40 minutes long. So basically a short film about how they made the episode. And Amelia Clark at one point said, "I was filming in negative 15 degrees." Wow. And I do feel like all of that passion and labor comes out on the camera. They went to great lengths to not CGI stuff. They went way out of their way to capture as much in the lenses they could without having to just go full CGI zombies. And I think it's very impressive. And I think that shows here too. For me, the jury is out on the story, but right now it feels good. And coming off Avengers Endgame, and no spoilers for that, but I will say that was another movie that might not have been the air quotes best movie, quote unquote, because it's probably kind of messy and there's a lot going on there. But you know what? I walked away feeling immensely satisfied and rewarded, and I feel the same way about The Long Night. So I think we're all pretty positive. Austin's got some criticism and some maybe kind of wait and see approach, Austin. I think that's very respectable as well. I understand why people are frustrated. I just don't agree. Though I will agree on the technical side of it. Dalton, to your point, this should have been screened in a theater. The black levels needed to be on point. I have a 4K HDR TV that has amazing black levels, but because of the compression of streaming through HBO Now, it didn't matter. It's not. Firstly, HBO Now doesn't even stream in 4K. It's only in 1080p. And on top of that, the black levels when they're compressed, man, they look real bad. So
even outside of black levels, and we'll talk more about this. There's some editing choices that, in terms of establishing the geography of the action, that are really frustrating. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we've hit on a number of things. Austin, I guess if I before we move into kind of our recap portion, if there's one thing a question I want to pose for the table, Austin, you've already touched on this. Do we think that is Game of Thrones becoming too conventional? So Game of Thrones being conventional might be subverting the typical Game of Thrones idea, right, Austin? As you mentioned. But at the same time, do we want it to continue to do that, or do you think this is like a one and done?
I mean, it's kind of been that way for the past 2 seasons, hasn't it?
I would agree
feel
with
like
that.
It has.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys disagree. I think the past 2 seasons have really strayed away from the complex branching storylines and intertwining plot points that we come to know and love with the series. And it's been extremely linear. Characters have acted out of character and really just kind of followed what I feel to be a standard fantasy template.
So it has been that way the last couple of seasons. I think sometimes it works better than others. And Austin, I also want to throw out there, I'm not afraid to criticize the show for bad writing. I had a conversation with a friend earlier today who was saying the writing for the show has been terrible for the last 3 seasons, and I don't agree. I actually think the writing for the show overall has been great for the last 3 seasons. It is different, though. It is a different show. It is. I think I've been listening to a podcast called Still Watching. It's the Vanity Fair podcast where they do interviews with they recap the episodes, but they also do interviews with people who've worked on it. And in the writers' room, they have phases. Phase 1 was very much season 1 through 4, where they had tons of material to adapt, and we definitely saw a transition in season 5 and 6 into something that's different. I don't know, Dalton, did you want to weigh in on this at all?
Yeah, I hope that the end of this episode does steer us again away from the conventional fantasy story that it's become. And again, I know Austin has really complicated feelings about the resolution of the Army of the Dead coming so quickly. My hope, and I'm kind of in agreement with Austin on this, that I pine for the more morally, ethically, politically complicated show, and I'm hoping that resolving this with over 3.5 hours, 4 hours of story left to tell, that maybe we can kind of allow the show to transition back to that, to actually resolve the fates of everyone. Because I honestly worried we would resolve the Army of the Dead and that would be the end of Game of Thrones. Goodbye.
Right.
And I'm glad that now there's still the good guys are rightly and truly fucked right now.
Yes.
The Dothraki are extinct. I don't like how quickly and without ceremony that happened, actually. I think it does a really big disservice to characters of color in Game of Thrones. I have a huge problem with that. But again, in terms of just where the story goes now, the good guys' big weapons are gone. I mean, they've got dragons, sure, but they have no army to speak of, and they have 30,000 trained mercenaries between them and the Iron Throne. And I think that's a really interesting place that might force a diplomatic resolution to this story, which is complicated and interesting. And that's what I hope for, that allowing Arya Stark, not the most obvious choice to resolve the threat, but by subverting the expectation that Jon Snow would be the traditional male fantasy character, by letting this little tomboy we've grown to love and watch become this death-dealing assassin, and to watch her, this person who is only motivated by vengeance and death, become a hero is really kind of cool and interesting. And that's my hope. I agree with Austin, though. I've been frustrated by the turn towards conventional fantasy, and I hope the last 10 minutes of this episode shows us that maybe that's Game of Thrones kind of showing its hand a little bit, that we're done with conventional fantasy. Now we're being subversive again. And I don't know that that's what's going to happen. That's my hope, though.
I also agree with that sentiment as well, because yes, if Game of Thrones were to end, yes, with just beating the ice zombies and someone being crowned king or queen, that would be pretty boring. My hope is that with this ending, it's messy. I want it to be messy and complicated and full of complicated feelings. I do think this, Austin, too. I think, and to Dalton's point, Cersei is an infinitely more compelling kind of final confrontation, or I don't want to say big bad because I don't think anyone's truly evil on the show, but kind of big boss, they have to overcome. I think way more interesting.
Yeah. Although big bad at this point might be accurate, because I lament what they've done with her character over the past season or two, where she went from like a tragic, complicated character who made bad choices to like almost purely evil at this point. You could probably use the term big bad.
I think there's still tragedy to her in that she's been forced. The man she loved has finally had it up to here with her and has bailed. So now she's had to allow Euron Greyjoy to be the father of her unborn child for the sake of legitimacy.
That's not tragic. She just won. She gets Euron instead of Jaime. Come on.
I don't think she's happy about that, though, I guess. And I guess that's the tragedy, is how miserable she is as a person. I agree that Euron Greyjoy's a looker in the trashiest way, and I love it.
No, I will stand by. I think there's still some moral complexity to Cersei. Yeah, she's basically evil, but I mean, it's the things that led her down to this road. Because she, listen, her blowing up the Sept was basically an act of I've got nothing left to live for, so fuck you guys. Her kids were all dead. They had taken her power. They'd taken everything. So
walked her through the streets and threw shit at her.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yes, she's basically evil and living it now, but she has nothing left to live. That's what I find. She's pure vengeance. She has nothing to actually live for anymore. And that's kind of interesting. It's not just she's evil for evil's sake. This is just where her characters end up. She was oppressed as a child, forced to marry an abusive king husband, had actually loved her brother, had to lie about their kids. I'm saying she's complicated still, even though, yes.
I wish she still had a somewhat redeeming motivation. She used to, in that she loved her family. And despite the evil things that she did, it was because she loved her family that she did them. That's gone now. And I don't really know what that motivation is. She doesn't care about the kingdom. She doesn't care about the city. She doesn't care about Jaime anymore. That kind of thing that humanized her feels like it's gone at this point.
That's a really good point, Austin. Yeah, the show has taken away any audience entry into having empathy for her. And that's a really good point.
No, I agree. And I think we even talked about that on the podcast in the season 6 finale. We were like, listen, her kids are dead. She's sporting the black robe now, and that ominous music is playing. She's a woman who has nothing left to live for, basically. So I don't know. I think we're gonna have plenty more of Cersei to talk about in future episodes of the podcast. But wow, we've talked for quite a while about kind of our feelings on the episode, reviewing, doing a little bit of a breakdown and dissection. We're not gonna recap the episode, but I've broken it up into phases where I've got some questions I want to ask. Because listener, I don't think you want to hear us geek out about all the cool action set pieces the whole time. I mean, we can do that a little bit, but it's more interesting if we kind of ask the question. So, phase 1 of the battle, this is kind of the build up. This is the suspense, right? So this is where the troops get into position. Melisandre arrives at the frick out of nowhere. Bran is put in position in the Godswood, and then the Dothraki right into battle. Melisandre lights their weapons on fire, which, holy crap, that was amazing. Holy crap. Just like that sequence, you knew they weren't going to come back, but still there was that moment, that kind of like last crowd pleasing, like, yeah, moment. Because, you knew that they weren't going to come back. I mean, did any of you guys think for even a second they had a chance?
I guess not, but like, it would have been
and
cool.
Powerful. Just crazy powerful visual of seeing them like ride into battle from the distance as Dany and Jon watching, and just all of a sudden, just slowly but surely, they all started to just burn out, and then going back to the front line, seeing a few of them plus their horses plus Jorah riding, fleeing for their lives back to the castle. Yeah, good stuff. So about phase 1 of the battle, I'm gonna start us off with a question, and I didn't put this in the outline, so I'm throwing you guys a curveball. Do you guys think Melisandre emerging out of the darkness randomly, was this Deus Ex Machina? Yes or no? If so, good or bad?
Yeah, that's like the very definition of Deus Ex Machina. Like, because she essentially gets all her power from God anyway. Like, that's 100% is. But there was a lot of that in this episode.
Or does it annoy you?
I think it worked. I'm cool with it, I guess, for like very trivial reasons, in that I was glad to see her again, and I was glad to see her contribute. The way she appeared was ridiculous, but I'm glad she was there rather than not be there.
So at the end of the day, it was worth it for that Deus Ex Machina. Daniel, what did you think?
I mean, yeah, I basically agree with Austin. It seems pretty ridiculous that she was able to just walk past everybody and walk up to the doors or whatever. But it makes a whole lot more sense, and it's a lot more interesting if she's there to have a say in what happens. So, yeah, I mean, it's a little forced or whatever, but it's worth what happens to get her there. So.
I'm very much in agreement with the both of you. I like that it is a payoff to the setup that, I'm destined to die in this strange land. So we've always known that she was going to come back, and seeing Candace Van Houten's name in the opening credits, I immediately was like, I'm so excited. Like, just seeing her name in the opening credits again, I knew obviously Melisandre would be showing up at some point. I agree with Austin that the staging of that scene does play a little hokey, but again, there's a charm to it that I kind of appreciate. Much like I appreciate the charm of her very slow walk into battle, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment.
Oh yes, yes.
But yeah, does it read as Deus Ex Machina for sure? But I think the show telegraphed her place as a servant of good well enough, a complicated servant of good to be sure. But I think her place in the final battle for the people of this world was telegraphed well enough that, I'm fine with it, but it definitely is Deus Ex Machina, to be sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was definitely Deus Ex Machina, but because she was there, we were able to get the resolution with her and Arya, of course, which we're going to touch on more later. We got to see her light some dudes' swords on fire. I mean, she did some cool stuff. Again, I would rather have her there than not. Dalton, you already mentioned earlier the Dothraki screamers. I mean, obviously, very powerful visual of them going, again, the lights being put out. But do we think this was the best use of the Dothraki screamers? I mean, one, you mentioned the complicated history of people of color on this show, but also last season we only really got to see them in battle one time. That was when they fought Jaime Lannister's army, and that was when they were doing the crazy stuff like standing up on horses, and yeah, it was amazing. So do we feel like a little let down, or do we think that this was a good use of the Dothraki to put them out?
I feel like the show has kind of failed to. I've been so invested in the Dothraki as just like an idea since season 1. It was one of my favorite things about the show was just this culture that's so different than anything we see in Westeros. So yeah, it was really disappointing for the culmination of their arc as a people to be led to their deaths by this colonizer queen for all intents and purposes. But it shows that Dany is, despite how she sees herself, she is not. And again, I like that Dany is struggling to be this version of herself and doesn't always succeed at it. I like seeing Dany's reaction to the loss of a people she cares a great deal for. A people that represent a man she once loved a great deal. So yeah, I dramatically. I think it's interesting. Again, the visual, I'm so glad Daniel made a point to discuss that when he gave his review, because that visual is truly terrifying and grim. But I'm frustrated with it from a story aspect for sure. In terms of what it does for Dany's character, it's pretty cool. But just in terms of the larger arc of the show, it's frustrating.
Well, it's like another one of those, hey, we spent years building up to the Dothraki showing up, and we did get to see them in battle once, but then they were basically just pawns in a larger game.
Dany basically committed genocide. She wiped out like an entire culture in one command. Like, that's literally the entire Dothraki force just decimated within a couple seconds. Cool. It was a great scene. The visuals of it were amazing and chilling. But strategically, really stupid.
I did kind of question them sending all the Dothraki to charge like first. I mean, I know that makes sense because they're kind of like cavalrymen and they're bloodthirsty and all that. But I was like, dang.
Yeah, waste of a cavalry charge.
Yep. Yeah, you should have sent out some scouts to like see how bad you were beat already. I don't know. It just, yeah.
In the end, it probably didn't matter because like literally everyone's dead anyway. So they would have died whether they charged in or not, but still kind of, goofy.
Yeah. Daniel, I'm going to throw this question to you. Follow-up question. Was Dany making an earlier than planned entrance strategically sound? Was it two questions. Was it strategically sound and or does it make for a more interesting story?
I think to Dalton's point, her response is interesting. Like, that they, from my understanding, the plan was to save the dragons till the Night King appeared, and specifically try to protect Bran with it. And that she kind of abandons that pretty quickly because she sees how they were literally, as Austin said, decimated. They don't exist anymore. So her reaction is interesting. Is it strategically sound? No, I don't think so at all. And she does a lot of really silly things with the dragon, I think, throughout the episode. But it is interesting to see. She's definitely, through the last two episodes, struggled a lot with trying to connect to the Northerners, to Jon. She's definitely struggling with her place and her identity. And so in that moment, she does something, and that is what's interesting about that whole sequence.
Okay. So it was worth it to see her character react and react out of emotion. She saw the children, the people of Khal Drogo, all killed. So she's like, all right, it was a good character moment for her. You think it was worth it?
That's a really good point. I think like she was a character who I think was always very emotional, but fought so hard to keep that suppressed because she felt like that's what a queen needed to be. To see her act out of care for her subjects, essentially, is good. I think that's a really good point.
And like Austin and Dalton said, there's a lot of issues with them just charging up there and all dying and all that. But that, I think, is what's interesting is, she's the character that we really have grown to know, whether we like her or not. That moment is really interesting for her.
Dalton, anything else you want to add on that?
No, I'm very much in agreement with you, Daniel. I think it's a moment where we get to see Dany forced to reckon with the fact that she's not a great military tactician. She's been overpowered as a military force by virtue of having dragons and the Unsullied for so long. She hasn't really had to. She hasn't had to be good at being a military leader. And I think her cockiness has been getting in her way for a long, long time. And I think this episode really is kind of the culmination of that coming back to bite her.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point because touching on something that happened later in the episode, whenever she fell off the dragon, I was like, she has no combat experience whatsoever. And she also, to your point, has no military tactician. Yeah, she's not a tactician. She's not a general. She doesn't know how to think that way.
She's good at listening to Jorah and the late great Sir Barristan. Sir Barristan, thank you. But yeah, it's a moment again where, as many character moments for Dany, is kind of centered on her overconfidence, which again I think has always been an interesting part of her character arc. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think you made some really great observations, Daniel.
Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and move on to the next phase of the battle, which is kind of the dead make major advances. So this is where we have Sansa leaves the battlefield because it gets too dangerous and goes down to the crypt. She gets Arya a training session from Arya, sticking with the pointy end. We see the loss of Ed Tullett. God damn it. Pour one out for Ed Tullett. And this is where the snowy cloud comes into play. We've seen this in previous encounters with the White Walkers, specifically at Hardhome, where you see it kind of coming in over the hills. So when it shows up, that was no surprise, but it was the way that he used it in order to kind of confuse the dragons. I thought was really interesting. We have this is where Melisandre, the armies retreat back into the Winterfell walls, and Melisandre lights the barriers on fire with her magic. Did you think that the dragon fight was hard to see? And so one, was it hard to see? Two, was it effective? And Dalton, we'll start with you on this one.
Yes, it is. I mean, kind of endemic of all of the cinematography and editing choices we've talked about. But again, I think that's a moment that is supposed to be extremely disorienting. As Daniel mentioned earlier, the sequence or the moment in that sequence where they have to fly above the cloud cover to get a better view reminds me of a great moment from a much underrated film, The Matrix Revolutions.
Yes.
Where Trinity and Neo see the sun for the first time. That's the first thing I thought of. I was like, that's a great visual pull. I don't know if anybody working on this episode is specifically visually referencing that, but I hope so. It's a moment of calm and clarity in an otherwise chaotic scene. So I think in terms of artistic choices, it makes a lot of sense. But no, it is completely incomprehensible what's happening throughout the entire time. Although the Dragon v. Dragon throwdown is super, super cool.
Oh, yeah.
Look, Dany and Jon being stuck in snow on dragonbacks just not super interesting. It isn't.
I don't think I had any issues like seeing what was going on. I didn't.
I guess I should clarify.
I think I'm in a very small minority there in terms of like I know everyone had a lot of problems with it.
No, you're totally fine. I was just going to say to clarify, I could see fine that's actually the lighting of those scenes was really, really good. Like it wasn't murky or hard to make out. It was the editing choices being made to show you how.
That's fair. It was shaky. There was tons of cuts. Like, yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
that's
and they're
totally
trying to, of course, put you in that mindset of Dany and Jon being totally out of their depth, totally disoriented. But as a viewer, it just makes it hard to. You don't know where the dragons are in relation to. The castle, you don't know. It's just very hard to track in terms of what are the stakes of this moment. So that was a part of it that frustrated me.
And I think there was that issue of, for me throughout the episode with the various characters, I had issues with the editing in terms of knowing where things are going on and how people got to where they were. And I think maybe they probably filmed a lot more, but cut things so that, to try to compress the time a little bit. So yeah, I totally get that. I think that's probably a pretty fair criticism there.
Okay. I actually concur. The editing, I think, was the bigger issue here with me. Part of it was I did, even though I didn't think the Night King would show up, I still had that thought in the back of my head that he might show up. So actually, when Dany and Jon flew into each other, I thought for a second, I was like, oh my God, they ran into the Night King. But it wasn't. It was just the two of them flying around. No, I think the lighting was fine. It was the editing that I found to be a little disorienting. And again, I think we've all discussed that is that was an artistic decision. Generally speaking, throughout the episode that worked for me, this was probably the only one that didn't. I did really appreciate the Matrix Revolutions callback. I kept thinking of Agent Smith and Neo flying around the city when they're up in the clouds when it was Dany v Night King on Dragon. But unlike the Matrix Revolutions, I actually didn't know where everything was at. That movie, I feel like I could track where the characters were at the whole time when they were going Super Saiyan at each other. So, so my next question, and I'm gonna throw this one to Daniel, is Melisandre. She uses her magic, of course, to light up the swords, like we mentioned earlier, but she also uses it to light the barrier. She has to go out there and say a prayer to light those logs on fire because Dany can't see the signal to light those on fire to keep the whites out. So this is going to bring us to Rolar, the Lord of Light. So do you think Melisandre using this magic is further evidence that the Rolar of Light has true power? And my follow-up question to that is just, with that said, we're so deep into the game, so close to the end, are we even going to find out more about Rolar, Lord of Light, or do you think that's just some mystical hoodoo that just exists in the world?
I don't think we'll find out more about him. I think it's just some sort of mystical being. Game of Thrones has never really gone out of its way to explain why magic works. Like, we still have no idea how Stannis and her created smoke demon baby back from season 2 that killed Renly. I mean, and that's part of what works, is like the characters don't even understand how it worked. We don't need to understand how it works. So I don't think we're going to find out more, and I think that's totally fine. And I mean, clearly she had, had some sort of confidence coming into this battle. She kind of walked with a presence of knowing what was going to happen. And I think, this is definitely evidence that there's some power there. I mean, you saw her light all the Dothraki swords, then you see her light this. Definitely the Lord of Light was present in this battle, and I think that it's very clear with Melisandre being here.
So I'm going to throw some Game of Thrones a tidbit, and here's why I think we are going to get more on it. At least I hope so. So the Great Other, a.k.a. the Night King, he represents the ice side of it. So he actually manifests himself in the personification of a character, the Night King. So I feel like because we have the Night King, we have to have a Rolar, the Lord of Light. Like that, actually, I feel like that's going to be personified by somebody at this point. They keep bringing it up. It's been a consistent thing throughout the entire show. I don't think we're going to learn all the ins and outs of how the magic works. I don't really want to know. But I do wonder, this could tie into our brand theory later, but I do wonder if somehow the Rolar, Lord of Light is going to still have an additional role to play in the last 3 episodes. Again, I don't want to know how the magic works. It's magic. But I do think that if we have, in the books, the Great Other is the adversary of Rolar, Lord of Light, and he is personified by the Night King. So that I would think that would mean that there is someone else or another character or fantasy creature of some type that represents that god as well. Austin?
Yeah, I think the presence of Jon as a character, because he was basically resurrected by him, could suggest that could come back up still. I'm still leaning towards it, them glossing it over and moving on. But people know that Jon died and that he came back to life. So we might still see some more explanation of what's going on there, or maybe it's critical to the story, to Jon's ending of his arc. Maybe he finally gives up the ghost and dies like he was supposed to.
He's on borrowed time right now.
Yeah, really. He's like a White Walker in some ways.
Well, you're all fools, of course. There is only one god, and that is the god of death.
And he was killed in this episode.
Well, in all seriousness, the thing that I've always liked about Game of Thrones is kind of this implication that all of the characters are all praying to the same divine force, which I think is kind of cool, right? There's all this overlap between the many-faced god and the Seven and the old gods and the Lord of Light. There's always been this implication that the characters, there might be some divine force at work in Westeros and Essos, and all the characters are unknowingly paying homage to the same divine force. And I've always been a big kind of a fan of that idea, just of letting religion in this show function in that way. I just think it's dramatically interesting. And the way that religious conflicts are interesting in our own real world. I think that's a big part of what makes Martin's world kind of cool, is the way sectarian conflicts play out in this world. So I'm with you guys. I don't give a shit. I don't need it explained. I like letting it just be hand-wavy magic. But I like the implication of uncertainty with as it pertains to religion in Westeros.
You keep leaving out the drowned god, and it makes me really sad.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't come from the Iron Islands.
He's civilized, okay?
I'm an inland folk, man.
He's just got the light of the Seven. Come on.
Come on. Look, I'm all about those old gods, baby. No, but yeah, that's a really good point, though. Austin, is the drowned god also kind of factors into this larger pantheon of gods, and there's a lot of overlap with the drowned god and the Lord of Light in interesting ways, and also the many-faced god in really interesting ways.
Daniel?
I was just going to say, we kind of glossed over it, and I just wanted to say, for a long time, I was going to talk about the Unsullied, actually. I thought that scene was actually very powerful, where we've been told, the Unsullied are this unbreakable, unfearing, entity, and this was the first time we really saw that in action. You saw the sheer, terror of everyone running back into the castle, and you just see the Unsullied there, not moving, ready to just make sure everyone gets in safely, and I'm just so glad that we saw that. I feel like some payoff a lot for the Unsullied and Grey Worm too, that they were in that moment. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I love that moment, Daniel, especially because right before Melisandre lights the pyre, Grey Worm has to make this tough call of letting his men die, of choosing the safety of everyone, and the safety or securing a chance for victory means letting these men that he's been with since he was a child die. And I forget the name of the actor that plays Grey Worm, but he really has a really wonderful moment of just face acting, where you see him go through so many emotions, knowing the choice he has to make before he collapses the bridge. I love that moment.
And the character of Grey Worm, I think throughout the entire series, has somehow escaped death. We saw it back when him and Sir Barristan got ambushed in Meereen. We saw it at Lannisport. We saw it here. This guy refuses to die.
I'm actually kind of surprised and shocked he's still here. I know we were certain after his whole, hey babe, we're gonna retire. I'm gonna retire in 2 weeks and settle down on this beach.
Just one last job.
One last job, exactly. We were all sure he was dead, but somehow he refuses to die. And Austin, to your point, using the word plot armor, I don't think plot armor is a good term for Grey Worm, because weirdly, this is no shade on him, because I think he's a great character and I love him, but the plot would probably keep going with or without him. So he doesn't even have plot armor. He's just that much of a badass that he refuses to die. It's great.
Yeah. I'm not sad about it. Badass Barack is fun character to watch, but he probably should be dead by this point.
It is a fair point, and that we'll have to revisit throughout this conversation. But yeah, Austin is right. Not killing beloved characters does rob some dramatic tension. Because look, oh my God, eye patch, son of a bitch.
Oh, Beric Dondarrion.
Thank you. Beric Dondarrion is a delight. But come on, Beric he's whatever.
He's my MVP on my fantasy league.
I love Beric Dondarrion. He's a cool guy. Nobody cares when he dies. It's a cool moment, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, all the characters that die are characters that the show's fine without.
Okay.
I actually forgot he died. Out of all the characters died, I forgot that he died.
What's wrong with you guys? The guy's died multiple times. He's speaking of
times.
Speaking of religious people in Game of Thrones, he's a guy who actually is a true believer in the thing he's fighting for. He actually believes in R'hllor, the Lord of Light. Because he's been resurrected several times because of it. So to see this true disciple who is doing everything based off of, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, is kind of bittersweet. We all knew he was dead. He was the first one outside of Brienne, who didn't die in this episode. But we were like, Brienne, Grey Worm, Beric Dondarrion.
Yeah, Brienne, Podrick, you say that song. There were so many people who were set up to die, and I guess that's how they subverted expectations.
Oh boy. So, Daniel, thanks for bringing that up. Yes, seeing the Unsullied be badasses is always epic. Let's touch on the crypts really quickly. So, we all have been hyping the crypts since the first episode. Whenever they're all like, hey, let's go down to the crypts, that's going to be safe. And we're all like, wait, no, there are dead bodies down there that are going to get resurrected. So we know this is a bad idea. I think we get a couple of interesting scenes down here, mostly Tyrion and Sansa scenes. I do like how we see how Tyrion is still anxious to want to go back into battle. But I think the scene that really hit me the most was whenever Tyrion and Sansa are kind of exchanging, reminiscing about their past. We were married once, and Sansa says, well, you were the best of them all. And he just kind of laughs and says, that's a sad thing. But I really liked those moments. I also thought this was the thing that the crypts really did primarily was to amp up the tension. Now, going back to the horror elements that we were talking about earlier, Nobody major died down there, but it felt like people were going to die. I mean, the scene where you can just hear them sitting in the crypts and hear the guys banging on the doors saying, let us in, let us in. And then slowly but surely they get silenced. That's kind of terrifying. And then whenever the zombies start crawling out of the crypts and chasing children around, that's also kind of terrifying. So I thought it was a neat little ad. We got a couple of great character moments between Tyrion and Sansa, but other than that, I thought it was primarily there to amp up tension, and I think it did so successfully.
Do you think it's not disingenuous to constantly bait and feel like people are going to die, and then no one ever actually does?
Have you ever seen a horror movie, Austin?
I hate horror movies. They're the worst.
I love horror movies, but Austin is absolutely correct. It does feel like a shortcut to dramatic tension, absolutely. But to keep setting things up and to let people off the hook it does feel a little shortcutty. Again, I much like all of us here love this show, and I'm not above criticizing it when I think it takes shortcuts. I'm right there with you, Austin. It robs a lot of the tension in hindsight.
I will say, though, there were characters down there that could have very easily... I mean, it's hard for me to say, they could be very easily be eradicated when we don't know what role they're going to play in the last 3 episodes. But I mean, Varys hasn't done jack really for the last 2 seasons, and he's hanging out down there. I mean, we had the little girl, the burned girl that was down there.
Tyrion could have died. Sansa could have died. They don't have like big roles to play down the road, really, that... At least I'm making assumptions here, obviously, because I don't know what's in store for them. But like Tyrion's had a pretty full arc at this point. He's gone through the shit. He's had redemption. Like it's not like these people have like a ton more to do.
Well, I'd be careful there because I think Sansa and Tyrion do have very important things to do. Varys, not so sure about. Who else was down there? There were other disposable characters down there that could have gone. And Gilly
could have gone. She could have gone at any point and been fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think that's a very. I didn't want to dismiss your criticism. I just
was standing around like getting attacked by zombies the whole time doing nothing. At least it would if he was going to survive, at least there would have been some consequence. I don't. Sorry, I'm harping on the same points.
And to be fair, I don't want to totally dismiss your criticism. Yes, I think we all agree that more deaths would have benefited this episode. I mean, right? Are we all on board with that, saying that, yes, more deaths would have helped the episode dramatically, probably?
Yeah, I'm shocked to find myself saying that I'm mad that the show didn't kill people I care about. But yeah, it's not even...
We were talking about this earlier, because when Oberyn died, I threw a fit because my favorite character died, but now I want everyone to die. Everyone should just die all the time.
I think it comes back to a lot of the editing and filmmaking choices made throughout the episode. We just see Tormund and Gendry on an increasingly large pile of zombies.
Yes.
And again, we see so many characters, we have so many scenes cut away from almost certain death. And when we revisit those characters, they're still fine.
It does feel weird. And this takes us right into the next kind of phase of the battle, which is, the Night King arrives above Winterfell. The dead actually enter the walls. They start crawling over the barricade using the other dead bodies of the whites. This was some World War Z level shit, guys, where the zombies start crawling. They're like a hive mind. They're crawling on top of each other to use each other as like a ladder to get over the walls. Terrifying stuff. But to what you're saying, another criticism I have, and that I don't know if I guess editing probably. It does feel really weird where, yes, you see Jaime and Brienne and Tormund seemingly in the same place, seemingly about to meet their demise perpetually throughout the episode. But at the end, they're fine. It would have been nice to have seen... I don't know, that's what's hard. It was already a long episode, and you see them killing people, but at the same time, it really does feel like they're just standing in a corner. It's like you're in a video game where they're just in a corner like grinding, killing a bunch of dudes. I don't know.
Yeah, just like farming zombies for loot or something.
Yeah, so I can't disagree with you there. At the end of the day, though, it wasn't a deal breaker for me, though. That these characters were all just kind of hanging out in the courtyard as bodies piled up like crazy.
I think it's not so much the lack of death. The more I think about it, as we're kind of discussing this, I think maybe it is the lack of anything dramatically interesting for anybody that's not named Jon, Dany, or Theon or Arya to do, I guess. Those core fighters who we saw spend such a good time around the fire last episode, to just leave them to swing swords for the whole episode with little to no consequences is what's frustrating, not necessarily the lack of death.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. Now, there are a lot of interesting things that happen in this phase of the battle, the phase 3. Well, first off, we see the Hound is refusing to fight because he's surrounded by fire, which, again, that's powerful drama right there, because we all know how much that irks him. So when you just see him kind of retreat and resigning himself to his fate, because he'd rather die by zombie than face the fire. I mean, really great stuff. And also, I think it's a nice touch that Arya is what draws him back into battle, protecting Arya. He won't fight fire to fight for himself, but he will to fight for Arya, because despite whatever's going on with that relationship, he does really care about her. I think that was a really nice touch. We also have the Zom Giant break down the wall and then just mow over Lyanna Mormont, which at first I was like, oh my God, did they kill her comedically? Thankfully, she comes back and they give her a good death, but God, this one hurt. Ugh. The way the giant picks her up, crushes her chest. I mean, she gets the sword to the eye, but man, it was rough. It was really rough.
She got to be a badass, and that's what I wanted for her.
And it hit me emotionally a little bit harder than I expected it to, honestly. Obviously she's just really cool, like badass young female character. But like when she died, I legitimately teared up. And I wasn't really expecting to be that emotional at her death, because she's not like a Sansa or something like that. But it was a very impactful moment. It's
a testament to Bella Ramsey's talent as an actress that this potentially one-off character gets this incredible moment.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the showrunners Benioff and Weiss said that originally she was a one-scene character, but because of Bella's performance, they're like, oh, we have to write more scenes with her. We have to bring her back. And incredible actress. I mean, it's great stuff. So I've got a question here about the Mormonts, but we're going to come back to that. And for the sake of time, we're going to come back to that question here at the end of the episode. The next piece I really want to talk about is inside of Winterfell. Now, this is where we see Arya running her way through Winterfell. I loved the hell out of this entire sequence. Tight corridors, running and playing hide and go seek in the library. Guys, I just played Resident Evil 2 a couple months ago, the remake, and this was right out of a freaking video game. Like, the tension was there. You even have the scene of the zombie dragging the sword on the ground slowly. I was like, oh my God, this is a Resident Evil or video gamey sequence, but in a really effective way, because it was very effective horror. I loved the lighting. It was dark, but I was able to track everything that was going on. And of course, it leads us to the Beric and the Hound coming to Arya's rescue, and then inevitably the death of Beric Dondarrion. And also Arya reuniting with Melisandre. The resolution of a storyline. We're so close to the end we can actually say, wow, these storylines are closing out. Way back in season 3, when Arya first met Melisandre, where they took Gendry, she said, "We will meet again," and then read the whole the blue eyes, the blue, green, brown, referring to the eye color, the people that she was going to kill. So did you guys find this reunion between Arya and Melisandre to be? Did you find it to be fulfilling or interesting? Worth the payoff? And was it good payoff as we kind of close out that subplot, that dangling thread from like 4 years ago? Austin?
Honestly, I totally forgotten that they'd ever met. And it wasn't until this scene that I was reminded of that. I'm glad they revisited it. I mean, they kind of had to, given the kind of prophecy that she had. But it was revisited in a way that I felt was really satisfying in terms of the eye colors and kind of foreshadowing what was going to come later in the episode. I was really happy with it. Again, really happy that Melisandre showed back up in this episode and really could have been considered the MVP.
Yeah, I would say there was a lot of MVPs in this episode between Arya, Melisandre, and Theon, man. It was a tough pick. Dalton, did you have any thoughts on this, the closing of this particular subplot?
Not really. We've talked a little bit already about how wonderful every second inside of the halls of Winterfell is. And That's really all I care to say about it. It is a resolution to a really incredible sequence in that episode. Arya in the library, Arya and the Hound and Beric running through the halls. Beric's very Christ-like spreading of his arms and noble sacrifice. I just love all my complaints about editing and cinematography choices. I have nothing bad to say about every second inside the halls of Winterfell. I love it.
I do have one complaint. And not once they're inside. Inside, great. I was really confused, as was my wife Bethany, about where they were to begin with. Like, because one moment they're in the courtyard, and the next moment everyone's inside a building. We didn't know how they got there. Like, there was no real transition. It was just like a cut, and you were there, and it was really jarring and kind of confusing.
For sure, and I'm right there with you. That's anything in the courtyards of Winterfell is kind of a total mess.
Yep.
But yeah, once they get inside, I'm right there. The moment of the Hound picking Arya up, all of that stuff, I really love. I'm with you, Austin. I had totally forgot Melisandre and Arya had met before. Completely forgot. But yeah, it's a fun moment, and to see Arya's renewed vigor, to kind of remind her of the badass that she has become, is a great moment. Yeah.
Daniel?
Yeah, you guys are right on. I loved the Arya stuff on this episode. Arya's always been one of my favorite characters, and this scene is just so well done. It's one of the better sequences of the entire episode, and it really sets up a lot of what happens later. The fact that the drop of blood is louder than her own movements, really sets up what's happening for later. The whole moment with Melisandre talking about the blue eyes, I think it does a really good job of just setting everything that Arya's going to do later, which we'll obviously talk about. But I also love seeing them meet again, and then invoking the Syrio Forel, who could potentially still be alive.
He's not. He's dead, Daniel. Just let it go. He died in season 1.
No, he was so good. We didn't see him die on screen, Caleb. We did not see him die on screen. But invoking that back to season 1 Arya, reminding her of where she started, I think was really, really great. Because we've talked about some of the fumbles they've made with Arya's character and the way they've written her, and I think this is sort of that callback to where she started and bringing her back into that mindset a little bit. So I loved this stuff.
You said we'd meet again.
And here we are, at the end of the world.
You said I'd shut many eyes forever. You were right about that too.
Brown eyes, green eyes, and blue eyes. What do we say to the god of death?
Not today.
Oh, God, that was fantastic. Yeah, no, I love that. I don't care if it's fan service or what. I don't care. It was amazing. It was perfection. It was
good.
Little fan servicey things like that, I don't mind at all. That's great.
And I'm just going to plant this here. We may or may not have time to talk about it this week. We're just going to plant it here. Walder Frey had brown eyes. Night King has blue eyes. Who has green eyes?
That'd be Cersei.
Or Daenerys. So,
maybe.
Just saying. Anyway, we'll come back to that. But before we do, we first, yes, and of course, rest in peace, Beric Dondarrion. You were my real MVP last year in the Fantasy League. You got me a ton of points this year. Listen, man, we had a great business relationship here. You had a flaming sword. You were really cool. I loved your convictions. But we got to let you go. It's time to go. And
we don't even need to talk about fantasy anymore, honestly.
Well, Austin, I'm glad you mentioned the Fantasy League because I really want to...
You mentioned this.
Well, how about this? How about you go ahead and give our listeners an update on this week's Fantasy League?
So as you may or may not remember, last year we did a Game of Thrones Fantasy League where we draft characters from the show, and they are all given points based on things that happen in the show. The 5 categories are violence.
Any man dies with a clean sword, I'll rape his fucking corpse!
Sex and nudity.
The gods made this, and it delights me.
Wits and schemes.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
Status and power.
Power is power.
And finally, drinking and eating.
I understand that if any more words come pouring out your cunt mouth, I'm gonna have to eat every fucking chicken in this room.
It's over. It's all over, guys.
I still believe. Austin.
All right, look. Okay. Caleb is cheating, like horribly cheating.
How am I cheating? You guys, I just want to point out, you guys all had a chance at Arya. I even told you when we were doing the draft, I said, hey guys, Arya's still available.
I planned to pick up Arya. I didn't expect you, of all people, to pick her up. So I thought I was safe on holding out for later.
She's paid off beautifully. I didn't expect it either.
Look, Arya. Look, let's just face it. Arya should have gone to me. You robbed me of that pick. She should have been mine.
Here's the current situation. Caleb is in the lead, a commanding lead, with 1,195 points. Daniel is in second place with 645 points, and the king is pretty much dead with 445 points. This week, the top scoring character was Arya on Caleb's team, obviously, with 225 points. She was also named the MVP by The Verge because she killed the Night King. She had a lot of great scenes, all of that. A worthy MVP. Wouldn't have been my choice, but a worthy MVP. Overall, Caleb in this single episode got 870 points, which is absolutely insane. And I call shenanigans on all of it.
Listen, man, I had both Arya and the Night King on my team. And I also had Melisandre.
Like, you had everybody in this episode.
I told you guys, you got to watch those B-listers.
Like, I was expecting that to, okay, that's cool. Caleb got all these characters, but they're all going to die in episode 3, so it'll be fine. But no! Nobody dies in the show anymore. Everybody lives forever. They live happily ever after. They get married. They have kids. They live in, a fucking fairy forest. It's crazy.
This is the real reason Austin had some problems with this episode, is it screwed up his fantasy league.
It's bullshit.
Austin, I did lose Beric Dondarrion. I don't know what you're talking about. He's gone.
He's useless. He's fucking Zippo lighter man. I don't like him anymore.
Oh, well, rest in peace, Ed. Either way. All right, Austin. Well, you fought well. You are the reigning champion, but you either live in my new world or die in your old one. So,
the king may be dead, but I'm going to make sure there is no throne at the end of this season. And turns out there's no podcast at the end of this season. So you'll never reign. I get to be the last reigning king.
Look, I don't have a dog in this race, but Caleb's talking some mad shit, and I think he deserves to be to fall, if only for his hubris.
Caleb was afraid to talk any shit before it started. He had to wait till he had this massive lead before he started talking.
You guys
he didn't have the balls to talk beforehand.
Classic Littlefinger.
Daniel, if you recall, earlier this season I was talking about a potential trade with you, and you said you would consult with your counsel. So have you consulted? Would you like to meet and sit down and discuss a trade? Off air, of course.
I don't even remember who the trade was for, to be honest.
It was for the Night King.
Was it for the... Well, no, I can't make that trade now.
Your team is called Night King. Make Westeros great again. I'll give you the Night King. We can make a trade.
You want the Night King now, Daniel?
Yeah, well, honestly, the Night King did not get that many points, honestly, though. As many as, Arya and Melisandre were much more point-heavy than he was, so...
I was a little disappointed with the Night King's performance, honestly, but, we gotta let...
You don't get to be disappointed in anything, all right? You could shut your mouth.
Guys, we've got 3 more episodes. It's anybody's game.
You don't fight with honor.
No, he did.
But let's go ahead and move on to kind of battle phase 4. This is where the dead actually enters the inner castle. This is where the whites enter the God's Wood, and we see Theon and his team start to fight for their lives. We have Jon and the Night King. They're doing what I like to call a dance of dragons up in the sky, where they're flying around, shooting fire at each other. This is actually where the Night King falls to the ground. And we see the Night King raises the Fallen to join his army. So basically, Jon and the Night King fighting. Jon beats Night King in the air, knocks him off his horse or his dragon. They fall to the ground, and then Jon starts to charge at the Night King when he realizes that he's about to pull that move where he resurrects all the dead bodies. I thought this was actually a pretty thrilling little sequence. I don't know about you guys. This is the point in the episode where I was trying to figure out where it was. I mean, I wasn't trying to figure out actively where it was going, but I had this moment, my epiphany. I was like, there's no way that the dead don't win. Because again, in my head,
Oh, no, that's the whole, like, through half of this episode, I'm sitting there like, it looks really bad. I don't know how they actually come out of this alive.
Yeah, no, exactly. It was where I was starting to get a little baffled about where this was heading, because in my mind, I was still like, yeah, there's no way that they beat the Night King here. But also, I mean, there's bodies upon bodies raining down on the inner castle. Jon's completely surrounded. Theon's going down. I was like, how did they get out of this? So I certainly did not expect that to happen. There's a lot of long takes of Jon running through the castle, killing stuff, which is kind of awesome to watch. But like, especially when I watched the second time, knowing it had zero impact, I was like, there's a lot of time of Jon running around being a hero, not doing anything meaningful. I don't know. Do you guys think that time could have been better used elsewhere? Or did you think it was a nice touch?
No, absolutely could have been better used elsewhere.
Yeah, it serves only to be a bait and switch to make you forget that Arya has just run off with renewed purpose and a potential mission in mind. It's frustrating. It only serves to be, you get to see Pretty Boy kill some ugly stuff, and it doesn't really go anywhere.
I just have to say that shot where all the dead bodies are literally raining down off of the dragon into Winterfell was absolutely terrifying.
Very cool.
When it happened, it was so scary.
Well, I like how Dany tries to go in for the save, and then she just sits there on the ground while the zombies are moving. I'm like, fly away, and they just swarm her like ants.
Flying, like, mass of muscle that could just take off at any moment. You're like, nah, I think I'm just going to chill here for a little bit.
So this is where, yes, Drogon makes it out. He fights the ants off, and yes, they fall into the castle, which is a very awesome visual. But then we have, Daenerys just in the battlefield on her own, no combat experience. And then out of nowhere, Jorah comes in to save the day. Now,
yet another Deus Ex Machina.
I don't think this one's as much Deus Ex Machina.
It's not as egregious, but he shows up pretty much out of nowhere.
Yeah, we have no idea where Jorah's been for a long time when he shows up.
It's true. He does kind of come out of nowhere, but the thing is, Melisandre, literally we hadn't seen an entire season, walks out of the darkness. We know that Jorah's at the battle. We know he's alive, though he looked injured. We haven't seen him in a while. Daenerys is in trouble. You better believe his eyes at all times when he wasn't fighting was on where's Daenerys at. So for him to show up, I felt was fitting for his character. It didn't feel uncharacteristic.
It was expected, that's for sure.
I thought it was a great little moment.
The moment they have together is really great. But yeah, it's just... it goes back to the editing stuff we've talked about. Where has Jorah been this whole time? But it is a fun moment for these two characters who have spent so much of their lives having this developing friendship and relationship.
Oh, a friend zone ship that he eventually kind of came to terms with,
He's a complicated guy.
It was always kind of weird, but he loved her. He loved it. It's like loving someone Yeah, I guess we'll touch on Jorah here in a minute, but let's move on to the Theon's last stand. The Night King enters the Godswood. We get a new piece of music with the piano, which is really chilling. Then you get a montage of how our heroes are hopelessly getting crushed by the dead.
Theon. You're a good man. Thank you.
before Arya shows up, what did we think of the death of Theon? Let's just jump into that.
I texted this to you guys earlier. At this point in the show, Theon is the best written character in this show. His arc from season 1 as this punk little kid who has mixed feelings about what family he belongs to, and trying to make these decisions to impress his father while still trying to remain loyal to who took care of him, to going through all that shit that he went through with Ramsay after, and then feeling like his father truly abandoned him, and then to come back from that, and then in this decision, on the boat, what was it, season 7, when he sees Yara in trouble, he runs and jumps. Here he sees the face of death, as we've called him, and he runs face first into him to try and make his last stand, and it's absolutely beautiful. Like tears were. It was just, I love Theon's character. His arc was so well written. He's definitely one of the characters they've handled better on the show, and it was well worth all of it to get to this moment for Theon, and he's a good man.
I'm glad to see you're finally coming around. I've been singing this guy's praises as a character for several seasons now, but in the past several seasons since he, saves Sansa from Ramsay Bolton and stuff, I've truly felt that he was probably the best written character on the entire show, has the best arc, and from where he came from to where he is now. It was a satisfying ending to Theon Greyjoy. I thought they did him a service in how they ended his storyline. Overall, extremely pleased with how everything ended up, and I'm glad to see that everyone else is finally appreciating the joy of the Greyjoy household.
I have always had a great deal of affection in my heart for Theon Greyjoy. It's unfortunate that so much of his story was spent in stasis, just watching him get tortured for 2 seasons, and that's, what are you going to do? You got to give actors something to do so, they don't go off and do other projects, but to see that rewarded, all of the horseshit we had to sit through, all the frankly unpleasant hours of television we had to watch involving Theon, to see that paid off in a really beautiful way, and to see him get literally the only thing that I think could have allowed Theon to feel truly redeemed, which is to hear from one of the people he had done the worst, "You're a good man," to get that grace from Bran is just a beautiful moment, and Alfie Allen plays it spectacularly. Yeah, I loved it. It was one of the highlights of the episode, to be sure.
I think it's worth noting that there's very little very little dialogue. We have earlier in the episode, Theon tries to apologize, and in the same way that Bran told Jaime, no, it's just what it is. He did the same thing to Theon. He says, if you hadn't done that, you wouldn't be here in this moment who you are now, and which is who I need. Alfie Allen, terrific performance. An actor who's probably never going to get the Emmy nomination, but I think is just as deserving as a lot of the people who have gotten the Emmy nomination. I think just terrific acting, and seeing that character fully embrace death, protecting the Starks, protecting someone he had done the worst, I think was especially moving.
But if only Arya was like 5 seconds back. This wouldn't be even a topic right now. It saddens me. It saddens me that the best death of the episode was a character that I love so much. But
yeah,
here we are.
And I think he is one of the few truly full-blown redemption arcs we've had on the show. This is not a show that's specifically about redemption, but that is a character in particular we've consistently seen that growth from, and very satisfactory to see it end in a redemption proper. So that leads us to, yes, Arya emerges from the shadows out of nowhere. The Night King catches her. She goes for the stab. He stops her arm, and she pulls a ray and drops the knife dagger, Littlefinger's dagger, and stabs him in the chest. Holy shit. And the quarterback is toast. Oh, man. Oh my God, guys! I was watching with some friends, and we all just screamed whenever she jumped out, and then when she got the stab, we just lost our freaking minds. What a scene! What an unexpected turn! We thought Jon would be the guy to do it. They kind of set up Jon to be the guy to take him down, but for Arya, as Dalton pointed out earlier, this character, a tomboy character who has been through so much, she's even had some shitty storylines, to emerge a badass killer protecting her family and Westeros, not the pretty boy they would expect. I think that's great. That is subversive storytelling, I think. And while this might end on a somewhat more conventional note, I think Arya being the one to get the kill is the opposite of that. And I thought it was terrific. So Dalton, we'll pass to you first. What'd you make of this the kill of the Night King?
Yeah, I mean, I, as you alluded to, I pretty much have already said everything I have to say about this. But it's not even letting her be a badass that's I think the unconventional part. It is the fact that she spent so much time becoming a badass and gets to do something selfless, reclaims being part of humanity a little bit. You know, she spent so long in this death cult that wanted to strip her down into nothing, and it's a great moment, and it's so effectively set up with Melisandre. It's so effectively set up throughout the series of anyone can die. Anything, you know, Arya's always had the if it bleeds we can kill it mentality of Arnie and Predator. Yes. So yeah, I've said everything that I really need to say about it. It's maybe one of the finest moments in television, right up there with the final couple of episodes of Breaking Bad and the suitcase on Mad Men. Like it is an incredible moment of television. And there's this video making the rounds online right now of a bar full of people watching that moment. And yeah, it's the whole world got to feel something truly electrifying when that happened. I loved it.
Yes, absolutely. Daniel?
Yeah, I completely agree with Dalton. I absolutely love that Arya is the one that gets to do this. And looking back, I think it makes so much sense that it's her. I mean, I think that you can go back to strands from season 1, and they're really are there. And for her to have that, I mean, you know, you guys know Arya has always been one of my favorite characters, and so the more that I just think about how deserving she was of that, and all the things that she had to go through to get to that moment, I think it couldn't have picked a better person to have that moment. It's I am just so happy that for her character and for her arc that she gets to experience looking death in the face and saying not today. And I think it's so good.
Look, the internet had a lot of issues with this outcome, that Arya specifically delivered the killing blow, as well as a lot of my friends who were like real upset about it. But for me, this was the one moment in this episode where it broke convention and surprised me. I was really thrilled that Arya was the one to deliver the final blow. If it was Dany or Jon, I would have eye rolled so hard I'd been permanently blind. It would have been the most like predictable thing ever for one of those two to deliver the killing blow. But for Arya to do it gave meaning to her entire storyline. Like all the crap we went through in Bravos, which I criticized so heavily, with it just being the most boring, dull storyline that just didn't have that much impact, actually came to fruition. We actually got to see that there was actual meaning to this. In the end, she was literally the only person who had the combat skills to get this done at the end of this episode. Jon could not have done that. He couldn't have won a sword fight with the Night King. Arya was the only one that could possibly do this.
It's a moment that, much like Barrick's moment of sacrifice and Theon's moment of sacrifice, it's one of several moments of characters doing what they were born to do, and it's just really it's great. I'm so glad we're all on the same page about this.
Me too, because my thing was I really was frustrated with Arya for the last several seasons, and mostly because I found her acting as a pure force of vengeance to be very uninteresting. This is not vengeance. This is survival. She's protecting her family, not avenging her family. And there's a very distinct difference. She only could have done it had she not gone to Bravos and not had the training of Syrio Forel in season 1, and not met Melisandre back in season 3. Like it really did add new meaning to her entire arc so far. And wow, just incredible TV.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And I even think, we talk about the trope that it should have, or the conventional writing that it should have been Jon. I read an article by Joanna Robinson, who wrote for Vanity Fair, who reminded me of this moment. back in season 2, when Arya is talking to Tywin says that, Aegon conquered the Seven Kingdoms, and Arya reminds him that it's Aegon and his sisters that do it. Like, this is something that's been building up for a very, very long time, and I'm just the payoff was absolutely, absolutely amazing.
She was never going to be the political tactician. She was always going to be the one doing the work. Maybe we don't linger too long on this because we are running short on time, but this does put into perspective the Azor Ahai prophecy, which has been largely downplayed on the show, but they have acknowledged it several times. We've talked about it earlier this season, the Azor Ahai, basically the prince that was promised who's going to come and defeat the Great Other. Well, is Arya Azor Ahai? Because she killed the Night King, so that would seem to indicate to me that she's the one who Melisandre was prophesizing, especially the way Melisandre, once this episode's over, she's done.
Have they actually ever mentioned that name on the show, the Azor Ahai? I don't know that they have.
They've mentioned the prince that is
they
promised.
Said the prince that was promised, yes. That they have mentioned.
And they also discussed that it is not gender specific. They specifically do mention that the language used could be female, could be prince or princess. But
that's about it. Yeah. It's largely downplayed in the show compared to the novels, but I don't know. Does it even matter anymore? Do you guys care? I don't know if I care anymore. We're so close to the end, but
I don't think it matters, and it upsets me that it doesn't matter. I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
But here's the thing, though. Arya could have been the person, though.
I don't know. True, Arya could have been, but part of what's great about Game of Thrones is we talked about this with magic earlier. Is we don't really get an explanation on why or how the magic works. It just does. Some of these prophecies are similar. Like some of the prophecies work, and some of them don't. Like there have been times where prophecies do not come true, and a character says they're going to do this one thing, and we think it's foreshadowing, and it's not. And George R. R. Martin has said before that I don't think that in prophecies aren't always interpreted or understood correctly. So I think part of what's going on here is, it doesn't. I agree it doesn't matter, but I think that's also kind of the point.
I do like that reading, and much to how Dalton talked about just the existence of religion in Westeros, maybe prophecies kind of fill the same role as prophecies exist in our own world. I mean, we've got Nostradamus out there. I mean, Austin, you were Ostradamus for a whole season. I mean, prophecies.
I'm still Nostradamus. Right?
Are you?
I have made many predictions. In fact, I make every prediction, and then sometimes some of them are right, and then I can say, "Hey, look, I was correct."
Powerful strategy.
Very powerful strategy.
If you throw everything on the wall, something will stick.
So, Ostradamus, what's your bold prediction for next week?
My bold prediction is that Night King's not actually dead.
Oh, you heard it here first, folks. Bold prediction.
He's going to come back. He's going to come back. I have to believe that he has some sort of impact still. We still get the vision from Bran in season 4 of a dragon flying over of King's Landing and the Iron Throne covered in what looks to be snow, might be ash. So it really could just be Dany like wreaking havoc on King's Landing, or maybe the White Walker threat isn't totally dealt with yet. That's my bold prediction.
Bold prediction.
Hot
take. Night King not fully dead. I actually quite like that prediction. So we'll move it along. Closing moments here. Jorah and Daenerys, the storyline is resolved. I'm just going to go off and name all the storylines that got resolved at the end of this episode. So Jorah's love for Daenerys, this is resolved. He died fighting for the woman he loved. It was tragic. He's such a loyal character, loyal to a deadly fault. I mean, the woman banished him like 3 times and probably tried to kill him once. Like, he's a guy who is very admirable, and I was sad to see him go. But here at the end of the story, I do feel like his death is appropriate. So, any last words on Jorah Mormont's behalf before we close the book on his life and character on the show?
I've always really liked Jorah, and this, you said it, this death is very fitting for him. This is, if he had to go out, this is how he wants to go out. So it was a nice ending for his story. And, I'm sad to see him go because I always kind of liked him, but it's fitting.
I am happy to see him go because I have never liked his story arc, and I thought he was a creepy character. So I'm glad he's gone.
I'm kind of with Austin. Jorah's had always been an interesting character. He's always been very well acted and well performed, but he's always been kind of a scrub. To see him, though, again, another moment of redemption. He got into Daenerys' inner circle to assassinate her, and to see him finally be able to show her, I wasn't full of shit. I promise. I really did care this much about you. And Emilia Clarke is honestly the reason that scene works, because Jorah was such an obvious, the moment where there's a last stand involving the two of them, that's how he's going out,
right.
is defending Daenerys to the death. And Emilia Clarke really sells the emotion of that scene. It was an obvious death. One of the few seemingly obvious deaths that came to fruition. But yeah, it's exactly where that character needed to end up, and clears the deck for more interesting interactions in the inner circle of Daenerys' quest for the Iron Throne.
I'm sad to see him go. I will say he hasn't really done a ton the last couple of seasons, but I think the same could be said about a lot of characters. So another big one, and this one was surprisingly impactful. So the death of Melisandre, walking out into the sunrise and just taking the necklace off and just turning to ash, basically. Wow, what a visual. What a visual. What a way to close out that storyline. I've never really liked her, but wow, she really came to save the day in the end. And I think, for her, kind of like Beric Dondarrion, she felt her purpose had been fulfilled. And she had beaten the Great Other. She'd helped beat the Great Other. So her life was over. So it kind of closes the book on her storyline, her rivalry with Davos. Davos being the one man who saw her walk to her death. Wow. Yeah. Do you guys have anything you want to add about the death of Melisandre?
Nothing other than to say it'll be sad to see Candace Van Houten go. I'm with you. Melisandre's always been a character that's been frustrating, but by design, she's been frustrating. She's a character that's always been very outwardly villainous, and to see her say, all right, well, that's it. Much like Beric Dondarrion, she served her purpose to the Lord of Light and is ready to meet her death finally. It's a powerful moment, very wonderfully shot, and yeah.
All right. And I think that will actually close out kind of our look back, review analysis, and in-depth discussion on The Long Night. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to hit us up on social media. You can find us on the Cast Beyond the Wall, on Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT, or on Facebook at facebook.com/cast beyond the wall. Also, our host, Good Trash Media, you can find them at goodtrashmedia.com, on Twitter at good_trash, also on Facebook at facebook.com/good trash media. Give a like. Host a lot of amazing programs on there. Good Trash Genre Cast. You got a comedy show. Wait. Heath and Alex have a podcast?
Yeah, that's the Praise Down with Heath and Alex, which is one of the most wonderful things that I've ever listened to. I'm so happy to have it on the network. The Praise Down with Heath and Alex, two very spiritually curious, mostly secular boys, review the Christian music they grew up with a bunch of guests who, it's a conversation about people's faith and their journey with spirituality. And look, it sounds like it's going to be mean, but I promise it's really not.
It's not mean.
It's the most wholesomely, decently spirited thing on the internet. I love both those guys with all my heart, and it's a great show. And then, there's a Loose Five with Wampus Reynolds, where comedian Wampus Reynolds breaks down a late night 5-minute comedy set, one joke at a time with different guests. Yeah, lots of great stuff. Goodtrashmedia.com if you like this show and want to hear more stuff like it.
Well, Dalton, on that note, where can people keep up with you online if they want to hear more of your opinions on Game of Thrones this season?
Oh, God, I can't imagine why you would want to do that. I'm at Doll_Stew on Twitter. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm constantly bashing my head against the wall that is the internet. Just go to goodtrashmedia.com. That's where the good stuff really lives at.
Excellent. All right, gentlemen, where can people keep up with you online? Austin Lucari.
My Twitter handle is ACLucari, Lucari. You can follow me there if you like. I don't really post a whole lot, but if you have any questions or comments, or you want to provide feedback on the show, maybe let me know what your favorite moment was. We talk about every episode this season. Certainly that's a place where you can do that, and we'll have it here on the show.
All righty, Daniel Stoll.
You can find me at Daniel Stoll 23. I'm not on Twitter a whole lot, but I'd love to hear from you, and love to have a conversation with you about Game of Thrones or anything else nerdy or geeky.
You guys are making the right choice. stay off Twitter. Stay as far away
Stay
as
off
you can.
Of social media. I mean, like if I wasn't doing this podcast, I would literally not be on social media. But I am on this podcast and I am on social media. So you can find me tweeting about all the things, including my Avengers Endgame review that came out this week at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. Doing monthly podcast episodes, monthly plus a couple extras here and there at the cinematropolis.com. But yeah, right now it's all Game of Thrones 90% of the time. At least 90% of the time. So hit me up there. If you did enjoy the podcast today, if you could go to your preferred podcast app, whether that be Apple Podcasts, whether that be Google Play, Spotify, especially. We are now on Spotify, which is an excellent way to listen to the show. There's a lot of heavy Spotify users out there. And I will say it has quickly becoming my preferred podcast platform. So check it out. Cast Beyond the Wall on Spotify. If you do enjoy the show, give us a rating and a review on any of those platforms. That'll help us get a bump and heard by more listeners like you. Dalton Stewart, thank you once again for joining us this week. Thank you for joining us in our final year, every year of the show. It's always a pleasure to have you on. We look forward to talking with you about Game of Thrones every year. And you've been a true friend of the show. And we're going to find more excuses to keep podcasting with you in the future, of course. But it's sad to say this is potentially the last episode of the Cast Beyond the Wall with you, at least the Cast Beyond the Wall as we know it.
It's been an honor and a privilege. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you again next week when we once again go Beyond the Wall.
Some people are theorizing that maybe the Night King isn't even dead. And if that's the case, oh man, that would be amazing. But
I mean, as long as he gets me more fantasy points, then sure, I'm all about it.
That's what it's all about. That's what this is really
listen,
all
guys,
about.
It's over.
Listen, Littlefinger,
it's like you're not kicking puppies now. This isn't even fair.
Listen, man, my team's name is Littlefinger's Revenge. I told you, if Littlefinger can't win, only the dead can. And right now, we're kicking ass. So
you need to stop fingering me, Caleb. I don't
Oh, gosh.